So the conference realignment gossip has kind of heated up over the past few days. We've got members of the ACC getting antsy, getting angry, looking at their current TV deal, looking at how long they're strapped in for, and waging war and saying, listen, we need unequal revenue distribution. And I said that probably should have happened last summer, but people have explained to me if you try and do unequal revenue distribution, it basically signals the death of your conference. So we've got reports from Clemson, we've got reports from FSU. Both of them are pissed at their current deal they have, and we've got numbers. It's crazy. Let's get into this, guys. The first thing I want to talk about, Forbes reports that following the Pac-12's media negotiations, talks are likely to resume between the Pac-12 and the ACC regarding a partnership known as the APAC, Atlantic Pacific Athletic Conference. Both conferences believe the merger would lead to greater media deal in 4 years' time. Would you be in favor of seeing these two conferences merge? So another one of these gimmick mergers that we heard about last summer a lot. These things always fall flat. It ends up not happening. It just ends up creating, more mouths to feed in terms of it. And really the only way this would happen is if the Pac-12 was in true self-preservation mode, which it's looking like they're going to be with how bad their deal is going to be, whether or not it's streaming only. You've got ESPN. Originally, we thought at least ESPN would want some type of rights, 50% of the rights to the Pac-12, so they could get that fourth window and get live football in that Pacific 10 o'clock, Eastern time zone. It doesn't look like that's the case anymore. Looks like the Pac-12 is on kind of a more dire situation in terms of who they can partner with, and that's why they've shifted to Apple TV. But the only reason a merger like this would be brought up is if the ACC sees that Clemson and Florida State and some of these bigger schools, they see inevitably they're not happy and they're not going to accept their current deal through the year 2036. They might try and do something to get them more money. And then for the Pac-12, the merger makes sense just to keep the conference alive and really on TV, because the whole idea that they'll be streaming only, you think Washington and Oregon are going to like that when it comes to, the only way you can watch this team live in an in-conference game, which is roughly 75, 80, 85% of your games overall. The only way you can watch the football team is by streaming. And and you've got Oregon, Washington games not on in bars and things like that. It's just a terrible situation overall. Clemson's AD comes out and says unequal distribution of ACC revenue is a need. He came out 2 days ago saying, quote, "Is it time revenue distribution within conferences, or at least in the ACC, is done differently? Yeah. I've been very active in those conversations within the league and continue to expect to take a leadership role in our desire for that to be changed urgently." So Clemson is pissed off about this, that, their current TV deal, things like that. And then how about on the same day, an ESPN story, Florida State's AD says lagging ACC revenue has to change. So you've got two of the big dogs within the ACC coming out, getting angry. And of course, this leads people to think about the ACC possibly dissolving. Teams like Clemson, North Carolina, Florida State heading to the SEC, and that gets us into kind of the super conferences, the 20-team super conferences that we were discussing last summer. But this is certainly an issue, and I believe here's a screenshot from Twitter, although this is a YouTube video, of the television contracts. I believe this is on a Zoom call or something with people. They're talking about the TV deals. You can see the ACC sitting at roughly $17 million per team with an expiration date of 2036. That is a death sentence, and that will just simply not fly with teams like Clemson and FSU. And right now, they're already ringing the alarm bells and saying something has to change. You're going to have to take money from the smaller teams and give it to us, or we will seriously consider leaving, although the idea that FSU could leave They would obviously have major issues with that because they're tied into this contract through 2036, and they would have to pay a massive fine if they left for the SEC. But you look at the overall numbers, maybe it's worth it. I mean, that's how bad this ACC deal is with ESPN and ABC. That was started in 2016. You've got the SEC also with ESPN and ABC. They're sitting right around $50 million per team, and I think that's going to go up each year. The Big Ten has NBC, CBS, and Fox. Each of those are paying roughly around $22, $23 million. That's an average combined of about $68, $70 million for the Big Ten. That's the number we kind of estimated it at least at the start of this deal when it was announced back last August. The Pac-12 needs a new deal. They were sitting at $10 million, but that was announced in May of 2011, so we're kind of seeing the timeline on the Pac-12 deal expire. That's coming in 2024, and they're currently negotiating. And then the Big 12 recently ended up negotiating a new deal in October of 2022 with ESPN, ABC, and Fox. So that combo will end up paying each team $32 million. And right now, the early estimates with the Pac-12 and their negotiations, you're looking at 16, maybe 20 million on the high end, which is extremely low. And the big crazy news about it is it's possibly streaming, at least 50% streaming. The last report that I read a few days ago on another video was that, a minimum is 50%, but they're saying no, it's going to be well over 50%, like 75, 80%. ESPN wants no part of it, which was the surprising thing. But apparently ESPN right now, they're obsessed with the SEC, and why wouldn't they be? The SEC is huge. Fox is obsessed with the Big Ten, and with the Pac-12 losing, especially USC, but also UCLA, they have very little power. They really only have Washington and Oregon at this point when it comes to really big movers. That $17 million figure is grossly inaccurate. So this is a Georgia Tech ACC fan responding to the $17 million per school. He's saying it doesn't recognize the full revenue stream versus the others on the chart that do. Last year, each program received over $30 million in a payout, and this year it is expected to be over $40. That just sounds like cope to me. You see this person responding, ACC will eventually break, with the revenue-generating schools either demanding a higher percentage, and they're already demanding it. We just saw 2 articles posted on the same day of higher generating schools, Clemson and FSU demanding to be paid more than some of these schools like Boston College. It's nothing against Boston College. This is just the reality of the situation. But of course, when you deal with stuff like this, normally signals the death of a conference when you start talking like this as ways to remedy some of these bigger schools feeling like they're not getting the amount they should be getting. And again, the kill touch, the death touch of this entire thing is they're locked into this deal till 2036. So there's going to have to be some form of renegotiation, you would think. If it's through 2036, I'm sure FSU and Clemson are weighing their options and maybe trying to convince some of the other schools in the ACC to get out of this deal, but that could prove to be hard because really if the ACC implodes, what's going to happen to some of the lower schools like a Georgia Tech, like a Boston College? It's not going to end well for those schools. Higher percentage of payout, or Clemson, FSU, Miami leave, and then Duke, UNC leave for the Big Ten. Can't compete with such a disparity long term, and that's the big issue through 2036. Now, this article about Florida State demanding a change to what the ACC is currently doing in terms of their revenue, it says, at issue, the ACC will fall behind both the SEC and Big Ten in revenue by about $30 million per year when the new TV contracts kick in 2023 and 2024. Something has to change because we cannot compete nationally being $30 million behind every single year. We're talking about $30 million every single year until 2036. So this is a real bad look right now for the ACC in terms of their numbers. It's a great deal for ESPN. It's a great deal for ESPN for sure, but for a lot of these bigger schools within the ACC, that's why you're seeing there's some disruption going on right now within the big-time ADs of these schools. The ACC is locked into its television deal through 2036. The league has also tied together with a grant of rights that lasts the length of the contract. In the most recent available financial filing, the ACC distributed a record $578 million to its members in 2020-2021. The SEC was at $721, but that is before its new deal. So the SEC was already roughly about $150 million above in terms of distribution before their massive new deal kicks in. So you can understand why you've got FSU and Clemson very angry about this based on a market valuation that he had commissioned. Alford told board members on Friday that FSU contributes roughly 15% of the value in the ACC media rights deal, but they only get 7%, and I'm sure people would argue whether or not FSU is worth less than 15%. Obviously, the FSU AD is going to come out and say, listen, we're worth 15%, whether it's 15%, 14%, 13%, I'm sure a program like Florida State, as they continue to get even better and kind of how good they've been with Jimbo Fisher, and really seems like they're building something, they are worth more than 7%, which is what they're getting. But again, these situations seem, anytime teams ask for more, it just spells the death of the conference. So right now, the ACC, they do have some options. You still do have these teams right now by the balls because they're signed in through 2036. What's the next move? Do you consider a merger with the Pac-12 to try and generate more money? I'm sure the Pac-12 would want that to save their conference. Or would FSU, Clemson try and convince some of these other schools to possibly void this grant of rights? If I'm remembering correctly, it takes 8 teams. Don't quote me on that, but I think it's something like that to void it, which it's going to be very hard to do. I mean, you could get a team like North Carolina, Clemson, FSU, Miami, but other than that, it becomes a little more challenging because some of these teams are just not going to go along with it. They're happy with the amount of money that they make, and it would be a way worse spot for them if the ACC got blown to smithereens. So that is kind of the current update with the ACC. At some point, this is going to come to a head, and there's going to be some type of resolution to this, but it's very clear the bigger schools in the ACC see what's coming, and they see how bad their media deal is, and they see that it's signed through 2036, and they're raising hell right now and saying something has to change because we're not going to put up with this. And they kind of coordinate it, and they come out on the same day and say this is ridiculous. Two of the bigger teams, Clemson's AD and FSU, come out and say this is just simply not going to fly long term because we've got teams, in other conferences making $30 million than us every single year. If you've got teams in the, in the SEC and in the Big Ten, some of the lower tier teams like a Maryland making $30 million per year compounded over the course of the next decade, what are we even doing here? No wonder these teams are pissed off about this deal. And it's nothing against Maryland. I'm just trying to compare kind of the lower tier. I mean, you could take Northwestern, you could take Indiana, although Indiana does have a good basketball program, and I know they generate revenue through that, but that is kind of the current situation when it comes to the ACC. I also saw a report that turned out to be fake that I don't even remember the channel network that the Pac-12 was going to go to. It was like the History Channel. I'm kidding. No, it was some weird channel, but it turned out to be a fake. It was not true. It was from a source within ESPN or something. I don't know where the source was, but it was tweeted out by legitimate people, and apparently it ended up not being true. They partner with C-SPAN. Maybe, you know what? Maybe C-SPAN would give them a good deal to produce Pac-12 games. I don't know. But guys, that's going to do it for this video. Make sure you're following me on Twitter. Link to that's always in the description.